I paused for 9 seconds before I gave the sentence. My left hand was flat on the bench, and my right thumb kept pressing the edge of a note card until it bent. I have paused before rulings before. I have never paused that long. This is the case that earned that pause. Months later I understood why. It was not because the law was hard that day. It was because two truths were standing in front of me at once, and neither one was willing to step back for the other. Before I keep going, I want to ask you something. Have you ever sat with a person who caused real harm and still felt, against your own comfort, that their life was not finished? Subscribe, because that is the place this story lives, and I want you here while I walk you through it. The sorrow current began on Friday, July 12, 2024, at 9:47 p.m. at the South Service Tunnel near Gate 3 of Halcyon Arena in Inglewood, California. 21,000 people were inside for a Lila Hart concert. Outside one tunnel, a false rumor spread that she was leaving through that exit. The crowd tightened around the barricades. Air got thin, movement stopped being orderly. A 17-year-old girl named Talia Mercer was near the front when the pressure folded sideways. She was pinned against a metal stanchion. By the time security understood what was happening, she was already losing breath. Elena Ruiz saw it. She was a 31-year-old paramedic with Metro Event Medical, navy jumpsuit, red trauma bag, yellow strobe clipped to the strap. She ran toward the compression point because that was where the worst seconds were gathering. Marcus Reed saw her at the same moment from a different world. He was 38, head of close protection for the singer, working off a live warning about a possible breach near the same corridor. He saw motion toward a restricted opening. He did not see help. He saw threat. He put both hands on Elena Ruiz and shoved her backward. Her shoulder hit the rail. The back of her head clipped a concrete post. Her trauma bag dropped and slid under people's shoes. In testimony, he said, "I thought nobody was getting through that opening unless I let them." 19 seconds later, he understood she was medical. But in a crowd crush, 19 seconds is not a small thing. The video record showed that 2 minutes and 11 seconds passed before another medic got to Talia Mercer. Talia lived. I need to say that plainly. She lived. She also left that arena with crushed ribs, a torn ligament in her left knee, oxygen injury, speech therapy ahead of her, and a fear of tight lines that followed her into grocery stores, school hallways, and elevators. Elena Ruiz left with a torn labrum, a concussion, and months away from field response. When the case first crossed my desk, it came in a thick binder with orange tabs, sealed medical packets, motions to preserve arena video, and still frames printed from phones held over panicked heads. The cover sheet carried one name. The truth inside it carried several lives. There is a legal tool most people never hear about unless a case needs it. I can issue a preservation order very early. It is simple. It means no one gets to lose the truth while deciding what story they prefer. I signed that order on July 15, 2024, because I knew those videos were going to matter more than polished memory. The sorrow current had a clear source: blocked care, delayed breath, injury that moved outward into months. The grace current had a different source, and I did not expect it. It began that same night at 11:08 p.m., in the parking lot of St. Vincent Medical Center, when Marcus Reed stayed in his SUV after giving his statement and refused to leave. He sat there with the engine off for 1 hour and 43 minutes after learning who had been hurt. The first time Elena Ruiz entered my courtroom, I noticed the way she turned before sitting. People with shoulder injuries do that without planning it. They measure a chair against pain. She wore a blue blouse, no uniform, no display of damage. One hand rested over a yellow legal pad as if she were steadying more than paper. What I saw in her was not only hurt, it was decision. Every time testimony shifted toward Marcus Reed, she made herself look at him, not softly, not bitterly, directly. She was refusing to let the room tell a smaller story than the one she lived through. Marcus Reed entered with the kind of body that had long been used as a wall for other people. Broad shoulders, straight back. Then I saw his left hand. He kept rolling the rim of a paper cup flat with his thumb. Before opening statements, the clerk dropped a pencil near counsel table. Reed bent, picked it up, and set it by her elbow without a word. It had nothing to do with the charges. It also meant I had to see him whole while still seeing what his hands had done. If you are still with me, you have probably gone quiet. Whatever was going on around you has probably faded a little. Subscribe. That kind of attention deserves the rest of this story. Subscribe and turn on notifications. From the bench, entrances tell me things words cannot. When Elena walked in, people in the gallery straightened. When Marcus walked in, people held still. Those looked different, but from where I sat, they came from the same place. The room already knew there had been damage. The room was also waiting to see whether truth would be handled carefully. The prosecution began where the sorrow current began. They played the tunnel footage from 3 angles. They slowed the frame to the exact instant Elena's trauma bag left her shoulder. The room did not gasp. That is not how the hardest moments usually land. People became quiet inside themselves. Then they played Elena's body mic audio. You could hear crowd noise, clipped radio chatter, and Elena saying, "Medic, medic, let me through," and then the sound of breath leaving her body when she hit the rail. She repeated part of that in court. She said, "I kept saying medic and his hands were already on me." That quote belonged to the sorrow current. It did not ask for sympathy, it stated fact. Talia Mercer testified next. She was 18 by then. She walked with a light hitch in her left leg and kept thanking people for handing her water, moving the microphone, opening the witness gate. Some young people become older in their face before they become older anywhere else. I saw that in her. She said, "I remember seeing a woman in Navy trying to get to me, and then I remember thinking she was gone." That was sorrow. Then she said, "When I woke up later, she was still there." That was the first moment one sentence in the room carried both currents at once. Her mother, Denise Mercer, gave the sentence I wrote down in my notes. She said, "Every time my daughter laughs now, I hear how close we came to losing the sound." I looked at that sentence for a long time. Grief was in it. Grace was in it. It refused to be only one thing. The defense did not insult the room by pretending the video meant something else. They brought context, which is not the same as excuse. Reed had spent 6 years in celebrity protection. In those years, there had been a stalking event, a knife threat, a vehicle rush, and a backstage breach in Phoenix that injured another guard. 41 minutes before the shove in Inglewood, he had received a radio warning about a possible forged credential intruder near a service corridor. His lawyer said one sentence that stayed with me. She said he spent so long standing between danger and strangers that fear started dressing itself as duty. That did not wipe away blame. It placed the failure inside something human rather than something simple. Here is what I'm offering. The rest of this story told the same way I have been telling it, with nothing flattened and nothing forgiven before it earns its place. Subscribe if that is what you want. I will keep going. What the defense could not resolve was plain. Elena Ruiz was marked as medical. Her strobe was visible. Her bag was visible. Her voice was saying who she was. Fear had outrun judgment, and harm had entered the room before understanding did. When Marcus Reed testified, he looked first at Elena, not at me. Then he looked down at the table and answered in a voice that stayed low, even when counsel told him to speak up. The prosecutor asked why he used force before checking who she was. He said, "Because I was scared and moving fast, and I let that feel righteous." That quote belonged to the sorrow current, not because it excused him, because it named the path from fear to damage in one straight line. Later, his lawyer asked why he stayed in the hospital parking lot. He said, "I knew if I drove home too soon, I would be taking myself away from what my hands had done." That belonged to the grace current. Again, not because it repaired anything, because it showed he was not trying to escape the truth once it reached him. Then came the sentence I wrote down on a separate card. He said, "I did what I was trained to do, and I hurt the exact person I should have cleared a path for." I wrote it down. I looked at it for a long time. Both things I was feeling were in that one sentence. I did not expect that. The convergence point arrived through a piece of evidence nobody expected to matter much. It was the recovery log for Elena Ruiz's trauma bag, broken strobe, split zipper, blood transfer on the lower seam. The clerk also read that the bag had been recovered and hand-delivered to St. Vincent, receiving by Marcus Reed at 10:26 p.m. The same hands that knocked the bag away had searched for it under people's feet and carried it to the hospital. That did not repair what happened in the tunnel. It did end any chance of telling a one-note story about the man who caused it. One reaction in the room told me the evidence had landed. Elena did not look at Reed. She looked down at her yellow pad and underlined one line with slow care. I could not read the words from the bench. I could read the effort it took to stay exact. I just realized, saying this now, that I had never before told anyone which piece of evidence made me put my pen down and simply sit there for a second. Subscribe. That moment matters more in a few minutes than it sounds like it does. Subscribe now. This case reached into an old memory I do not usually bring near my work. I was 13. My older brother came home after a truck accident with stitches over one eye and a silence in him I had never seen before. That night my mother stood in the kitchen tearing bread into a bowl of soup because she could not keep her hands still. My brother took one spoonful, winced, and smiled anyway so she would eat too. I am not offering that memory as a lesson. I am only placing it beside this case. It belongs there. By sentencing, I had the victim impact letters, the probation report, the medical records, the preserved video, and the arguments from both sides. Reed had entered a plea to felony obstruction of emergency medical assistance causing bodily injury, misdemeanor battery on emergency personnel, and reckless endangerment. The state asked for incarceration. The defense asked for suspended time with strict probation and a restorative structure tied to emergency access. The letter that sat heaviest with me came from Elena Ruiz. She wrote that when Marcus Reed shoved her, he did not just injure her shoulder. He used force to stop her from being who she was trained to be at the exact second that training mattered. Then 3 paragraphs later she wrote, "Please do not let the worst minute of his life be the only minute the law remembers." Talia Mercer's letter was shorter. She said, "I need him to know I still count in this story." I read that line 3 times. Some people ask the law to punish. Some ask the law not to erase them. Those are different requests. I want to stop here for just a moment, not for effect, because that sentence from Talia still sits in me the same way it did when I first read it, and I need a second with it. Subscribe while I take that second. Subscribe and stay, okay? Let me keep going. The day of sentencing, the room had that close stillness a courtroom gets when people know the next few minutes will travel far beyond the walls. Elena sat with both hands around a paper cup. Talia sat beside her, one sneaker toe tapping once against the floor. Marcus Reed stood at counsel table, shoulders squared, jaw tight enough to mistake for calm if you were not looking carefully. My hands were on the edge of the bench, thumb against thumb. I had decided carefully. I had decided knowing the ruling had to hold the weight of what was lost and also leave room for what might still happen. Those two things do not always fit in the same ruling. In this case, they did. I had made sure they did. I said, "Mr. Reed, I sentence you to 5 years of formal probation, with execution of a 12-month county jail term suspended so long as you comply fully with these conditions." Then I said, "I am ordering you to pay $185,000 in restitution to Talia Mercer for rehabilitation care, speech therapy, follow-up treatment, and school support connected to the injuries from July 12, 2024. I am ordering $42,000 in restitution to Elena Ruiz for surgery costs, lost wages, and physical therapy. Money cannot give either of them back the exact life they had before that tunnel. It can at least stop the financial part of the harm from growing larger." I said, "I am ordering 800 hours of supervised service with Los Angeles County Emergency Preparedness and Metro Event Medical, focused on crowd egress and medic access. You blocked help. You are now going to spend your time making help easier to reach." I said, "I am also ordering 18 months of weekly therapy with a clinician approved by probation and trained in hypervigilance, occupational identity, and impulse control under perceived threat. This court heard a great deal about your training. It also heard what that training became when fear outran judgment. I am not leaving that untouched." I said, "For the first 24 live events you worked during probation, if you worked them at all, You will report 2 hours before doors open to the venue medic supervisor, wear the medic channel on a secondary earpiece, and walk the emergency lanes with that supervisor before a single patron enters. When a medic moves, you will move first to clear the way. Then I said, every 3 months for 2 years, you will attend a restorative accountability conference with probation, a working paramedic, a venue safety manager, and, if they choose to attend, Elena Ruiz or a representative for Talia Mercer. You will answer plainly. You will describe the delay in minutes and the cost in names. Accountability that stays on paper tends to stay abstract. I will not let this remain abstract. I left one condition for early completion. I said if after 18 months you have paid restitution in full, completed 600 service hours, finished therapy and required coursework, and received written certification from 3 separate medic supervisors that you have become reliable in preserving emergency access, this court will hear a motion to reduce probation from 5 years to 3. That was the most honest way I could say what I believed without calling it belief. Then I spoke to him directly. I said, you used your body to stop the one person in that corridor whose whole purpose was to reach distress before it became death. That cost Elena Ruiz her work for months and cost Talia Mercer a safer recovery than she was owed. I said, to the people you harmed, your fear does not make their pain smaller. I said, to you, Mr. Reed, the charges in this file do not contain the whole of you, but they do contain a true part, and you are responsible for what that part did when it had control. I said, to everyone in this room, justice is not thin enough to be made only of punishment, and it is not soft enough to be made only of mercy. Then I ended with the plainest sentence I had. I said, what we choose in one frightened minute can enter years we have never seen. You just heard what I said to him in that courtroom. I want you to hold that. Subscribe before we go further, because what happened after I said it is the part of this case I have thought about the most. Subscribe now. When the room began to empty, I stayed seated for a moment. From the bench, I watched Marcus Reed turn toward Elena Ruiz. He did not walk up to her. He stopped beside his lawyer and said, low enough that only the front of the room could hear, I won't waste this. Elena heard him. She did not answer. She put her hand over Talia's forearm and stood. Before I rose, I smoothed the bent note card on the bench with 2 fingers. Just that. Then I stood and went back through the door behind me. On March 14, 2025, 8 months later, I received a probation update and then a short note from Elena Ruiz with a photo attached. In it, a medic team was rolling a stretcher through a corridor marked Medic Access in yellow tape at a charity show. Marcus Reed was standing at the mouth of that lane in an orange safety vest, one arm out, holding private security back from the path. Elena wrote one line under the photo. She said, this time he moved before I had to say it. Sorrow was still in that sentence. So was grace. They were standing in the same place by then. There was an appeal. Reed challenged the live event medic reporting condition and the accountability conference requirement in the California Court of Appeal, 2nd Appellate District. On February 3, 2026, that court affirmed the sentence in full, holding that both conditions were closely tied to the offense, public safety, and rehabilitation. It took just under 11 months. When I got that news, I did not feel release. I felt steadiness. I felt sadness that a sentence built to hold both truth and possibility had to be defended so hard. I also felt grateful it would remain in place long enough to do its work. That is the most honest way I know to say it. This case showed me something I am still working out. There are moments in court when the real work is not choosing between grief and grace. It is refusing to lie on behalf of either one. If you are someone who knows the sorrow current in your own life, who has had safety taken from your body, your work, or your sleep, I will not offer you a neat sentence and call it comfort. What I saw in Elena Ruiz was effort. I saw the labor of staying open enough to tell the truth without letting the harm become her only shape. And over the course of the case, I watched something else. The sorrow did not leave her. It also did not take away her precision. If you are someone who recognizes yourself more in Marcus Reed, if you made a choice that harmed people and now you are living after it, I can tell you what separates the people who move towards something from the people who do not. The ones who move forward stop arguing with the fact of harm and become useful. That is the difference. And the one thing I wish I could say to every person in that chair is this: the worst thing you did is not entitled to be the only thing you do next. I paused for 9 seconds before I gave the sentence. My left hand was flat on the bench and my right thumb kept pressing the edge of a note card until it bent. That is why I told you this story. Subscribe and stay. Tell me in the comments if you know what it is to hold two true feelings at once and not drop either one.